Hello, I am Douglas Lane Leclerc. I am a live sound engineer and tour manager and sometimes musician as well.
Excellent. So, starting off, how did your journey into the music industry begin?
Going back to the very beginning of being a sound engineer happened again kind of as an accident where some friends of mine used to put on some free concerts actually in Kilmarnock. This is like late 1990s. And we had some sound equipment that had been loaned to us, but no one really knew how to use it. So someone had to kind of volunteer to be the person to try and figure out how to make the microphones work. I got quite interested in that and sort of began there, which then after I left school led to going to college to study it for a little while. Did a year at North Glasgow College studying sound there, radio production and sound. And after that, I managed to very quickly and luckily get some gigs working in small venues, which over a few years built up into regular work and then eventually a job.
Excellent.
Mm.
So, how did you actually go about approaching venues for work? How does that work?
I well, quite luckily, I approached a venue that I liked at I think the age of 18. A friend of mine started working as a manager at a place called the 13th Note in Glasgow,
Hmm.
and it was somewhere I knew. And I'd said, are you looking for any sound engineer staff at the moment? And they said, well, we'll put you in touch with our head sound engineer. They can tell you what's happening. And luckily, someone had just left. There was a vacancy, and so I kind of got a tryout audition at 18, which was ridiculously young, to get an opportunity to go in straight into a venue. And I went in, did some trial shifts. The guy said, you seem to know what you're doing. Come in for a couple of real shifts and we'll see how it goes. And then I managed to make that stick, and that became my first in venue live sound job. And it was really good fun, and it was a great experience to be doing it. Concurrently, it was actually while I was still studying at college as well. So I was doing college during the day, and then some days was able to leave early and get to the venue for sound check and do a few gigs. So that's where that began. So just kind of brass necked it and asked the venue and got lucky. But yeah.
So it's a strong case with a lot of opportunities that we actually get presented with in music. It's brass neck and luck.
Yes.
um, it's really, really cool. Okay, so sort of talk me through what does your job actually involve? What happens from when you get to the venue to when you leave the venue?
So yeah, starting off, if you are lucky, there's been some communication with the musicians that you're working with in advance, and they might have sent over some kind of technical information that says how many people there are in the band, how many of them need a vocal mic set up, how many of them need guitar amps and stuff like that. So the first thing you do is you set the stage up as best you can in preparation of the band arriving to make things run smoothly when they get on stage. So they're not really having to spend too much time asking for stuff that isn't there. If not, first thing you can do is say hi to people and be nice and friendly and try and remember everyone's names. Goes a long way. If you can, an hour after you first meet someone, remember their name. That usually makes them feel more at ease, and confident that you know what you're doing. And yeah, and then set up according to their equipment, get the sound checks on the go. So then we start making sure all the instruments are working properly, all the microphones are working properly through the PA speakers. Start putting together a live mix, and then try and get the band satisfied on stage. And that's probably the most important thing of working in a small venue. Is it's probably best to focus on making sure that the band are happy with the sound on stage before you even worry about what it sounds like through the PA system, because their comfort makes everything easier. If a band are happy on stage, they'll play better, they'll have less complaints, and it makes your job later on to do the sound when there's an audience in the room a lot easier, because you're not having to worry about whether someone on stage is having an issue at that point. So yeah, be nice to everyone, say hi, remember their names, make sure they've got the monitor mixes that they need, and yeah, move forward from there. So that's the kind of basic workflow um, of a gig.
So what's the difference between a large venue for some of the work that you have involved?
Large venues can usually mean over a certain size, you might have a separate sound engineer for the onstage sound. So that actually makes the workflow go even quicker because you have two people working with the band. One person whose job it is entirely to do the sound for the audience in the front of the venue. And the other person's job is to make sure that the sound on stage is good for the performers. So that would be your monitor engineer is doing the sound on the stage and your front of house sound engineer doing the front of house. So that can actually speed things up because you've got an extra pair of hands and ears working on that job. So yeah, that can be quite exciting. It's more pressure in a sense because it means if anything goes wrong on the one task that you have, it's more noticeable for everyone involved. So you have to be like on your game to make sure that doesn't happen.
Totally.
Hmm.
Okay, so how did you step into tour management?
That was, yeah, a happy accident of a friend of mine who was already working as a tour manager who has gone on to do some pretty big bands, and he now lives in Canada. Needed someone to help cover a tour. He had, I think it was about a 5 week long tour, and he could only cover the UK leg, and there was a European leg, and I had never really toured Europe before, but I had recently bought my first ever van. An important thing, if you can get access to a van, is very useful for finding work. Um, then he said, "Oh, so you've got a van and you know how to do sound. I need someone who can drive a van, do sound, but also kind of do the tour managing as well, looking after the band, booking hotels, that kind of thing." And I hadn't really done it before, but I wanted to do it. So I thought, well, I can give it a go. And he's kind of there to help me. So again, it's good if you know someone who's already doing that job, ask them for any advice that you can get from them. And yeah, we did the first leg of the tour together where I was kind of watching what he was doing every day. And once we'd finished the UK leg, we did the European leg of the tour. I took the band in my van, drove through the Channel Tunnel over to France, drove on the first side, for the first time ever on the wrong side of the road,
Mm-hmm.
which was mildly terrifying, but you have to do it. And yeah, that was an adventure, and it was really, really good. So that was how I got started tour managing. Was just that simply it kind of was an extra role to be performed alongside things I already did know how to do.
Yeah.
So, and that can be the way with a lot of jobs in the music industry. If you're a musician as well, for example, some bigger touring bands need people to be like instrument and stage technicians to look after, say, for instance, the drummer of a band needs someone to help set the drum kit up every night. And if you're a drummer, that's probably quite a good job for you because you know how to do that. So you could be a drummer, but you can also become a drum tech or a sound engineer or a tour manager alongside that so that you have maybe a couple of skills you can perform, making you more valuable as a worker on the road. Because one thing, sadly, the industry always needs is people to kind of double up on jobs.
To save money, which
Yeah, it's all about the budget, unfortunately. So, but if you're lucky, you can find a good combination of roles that suits you. So, being a musician and knowing how to be good with people and emails and organization means you could probably be a tour manager and maybe an instrument technician as well. Or if you know how to drive and you can do sound, then you can be the driver and the sound engineer. So you can do two jobs and you're more likely to get a tour. So it's nice to be able to double up on skills. So yeah, get your driver's license as soon as you can as well. Driving is very important.
Oh my god, the amount of bands and stuff that I personally know don't know how to drive, and that's always the mad panic, especially if sometimes in Scotland, say you're playing somewhere as far as like Inverness or Aberdeen, and no one has a way of getting there.
Yeah.
Definitely a massive skill that would be really beneficial for anyone obviously wants to get into this line of work. Okay, so do you have any sort of like nice, wow, I can't believe this is my job stories? Because, you know, we're in the music industry, the best industry there is, and we work with some really cool people which is in a work capacity, which is nuts.
Sure.
What are your ones?
There's a couple that always spring to mind. One is to do with a band that I've worked with for a few years now, who were a favorite band of mine when I was growing up. When I was growing up, I was very into punk rock and metal.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a band who I discovered when I was quite young called the Dead Kennedys, who are an American punk rock group, or more of a kind of hardcore group, but they were quite famous for
Mm-hmm.
a while. Their song Police Truck was very famously used on the Tony Hawk skateboarding game on the PlayStation, which I think is also in the reissue that just came out recently. So they're still out there in the sort of pop culture world. But yeah, a friend of mine became their tour manager a few years ago, and they needed a sound engineer for a European tour. And he recommended me. He didn't give me the job, but he said he recommended me to the management, and I gave them a copy of my CV, and they got back in touch and said, "Yeah, you've done some stuff that looks like it might work for us. Let's give it a shot." And so yeah, I got to do. I think it was the first tour I did with them involved an appearance at the Shangri-La stage at Glastonbury in front of 10,000 people. So no pressure. But that was one of those moments where halfway through the set, after frantically doing the festival sound check, which is you have to do it very quick because you have to change the bands around very quickly to keep the running times going, and yeah, that was one of those pinch yourself moments where you stand back and you think, oh, I'm doing sound for a band who I've been listening to almost my entire life at Glastonbury.
Wow.
This is surreal.
Yeah.
That was lovely. And also the flip side of that is I've been working for a while with a band from Glasgow called the Ninth Wave,
Mm-hmm.
who 2 years ago, it was 2 years ago this week, February 2019, they supported churches at the Hydro in Glasgow, which was, I think, and still is probably the biggest indoor venue I've worked doing sound at, which is 12,000 capacity, and that was sold out. So that was another one where you get to see a band who you've seen come up from the kind of local band circuit and then get a shot at playing on a huge stage in front of a big crowd supporting a very famous band. And that was another moment where everything kind of came together really beautifully, and it went really well. Everyone had a great night, and it was just standing back in a big room watching thousands of people see this band for the first time and them just being on top of the moon. You know, it was like, wow, can't believe we're here. So yeah, occasionally you get to do really exciting things like that, and that makes the job seem extra special. It's always a good job anyway, even when you're playing smaller venues or doing harder tours. It's still a cool job. But yeah, sometimes those moments are the icing on the cake.
I suppose especially since you've been working in this band for say a while and you're part of the team, you're part of almost like literally not in the band, but you are part of the bigger collective to then see them do well and then you're doing well as well. It's a really nice feeling. It really, really is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it feels like when it goes right, it feels like a little family unit who can weather an awful lot of hard work together, and the reward at the end of it is if it goes well, everybody gets to go home feeling great because you did a good job and the band are happy, and yeah, that's a really great feeling.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so almost on the flip side of that, maybe to make anyone feel better with, especially when they're starting out and have that anxiety of things going wrong, do you have any instances of stories or something going completely wrong that you've handled it to the best of your ability?
Yeah, there's been a couple of times where things have required you to kind of think outside of the normal rules of the job. Actually, one of the things that Glastonbury appearance for the Dead Kennedys was that quite nearby to where our stage was set up was a tent that was playing ridiculously loud reggae music, which has very powerful bass frequencies, and it was causing the sound desk where I was to kind of almost vibrate with bass frequencies because it was so loud. So I had to then speak to the festival staff and find out if there was a site manager available to find out if there was anything that could be done about this interference from another sound source causing a problem on our stage, because it was a big crowd and it was a very important show, and I just felt like maybe something wasn't right here. So I got the site manager on the radio and said, you come over and check that these guys are not making too much noise. And sure enough, he came over and he found out that they had messed with their power amps on the PA, and they actually turned everything up much louder than they were supposed to, because it wasn't even a live music tent, it was just DJs. So I managed to get them to turn the volume down again so we could actually hear what we were doing and concentrate on getting our show done. So sometimes you have to defend your corner. Like, sometimes people don't think too much about how what they're doing affects somebody else, and you have to go over and say, in the interest of presenting my artist's work, could you please turn that reggae music down?
You sounded like one of those like annoyed neighbors coming down the stairs.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry to be that guy, but we have 10,000 people and a punk rock band over here who are trying to get on with it, and your lovely reggae music is just a bit too loud. So if you wouldn't mind.
So it's one of those situations that like may or may not happen to you. You never know, and it is very much like thinking in your feet. Because can you imagine you tried to do the show? What if that was going on?
Yeah, and I think you have to be kind of a little bit brave sometimes to make these requests, because when I sort of said to the rest of the staff who were working at the festival, is that right? Should that be that loud? Is this okay? They were like, we don't know. Like, maybe. I was like, okay, cool. I need to take this into my own hands. Like, no one was really willing to go out on a limb and actually do anything about it. And other things you have to do that with in tour management, it would include looking after people if they're having problems as well, like within the organization. If anyone's struggling a little bit emotionally on tour, or if someone goes missing in Dublin and goes drinking all night and misses the ferry, which happened one time, then you have to figure out how you're going to get everyone back on the next ferry and get to the next gig on time. So those problems do occur. People's behavior sometimes, they get a bit excited and have a bit too much fun, and you have to be able to help them out afterwards and make sure that it stays on track.
Yeah.
So
talk about being the parent on a tour, having to be the most responsible one.
The phrase tour dad has been used. Yes.
Okay. This is the question that I don't like to ask everyone because I know what it's like, but it's interesting to hear. So, how has COVID affected you? What's
well, I mean, yeah, how hasn't it affected me? Going back to the start of March last year when COVID first started to appear, I was, I guess, amongst the first wave of people to actually catch it. My suspicion is that it was passed on either through somebody from my wife's workplace or possibly from a show that I was working at. I was right up until the week of lockdown beginning from the first time round and venues closing, I was working in full rooms with people. Presumably someone in one of those rooms had it. And I caught it pretty quick. It was horrible. So first of all, it really knocked me for 6 physically, meaning that even if the venues had still been open, I would have had to have taken 2 weeks off anyway to quarantine and recover. But in fact, the effects of the illness itself took, for me, about 6 weeks to really allow me to be kind of strong enough to get back to any kind of normal routine. And then, of course, subsequently, the infection rates have closed everything down. So there's been no live music available this whole time, which when you're a live sound engineer and tour manager is your lifeblood. And so it's affected things pretty badly. Everything I've had lined up where lockdown has been postponed and then postponed again. And now we're just not sure about whether it's even worth trying to book anything until we've got a much clearer idea of how much longer it's going to be until things are safe. So yeah, it's been absolutely crazy. It's flipped the whole game around, and I've been doing other work in the meantime. I've managed to find some work as a delivery driver because, again, one of those skills that I had from before. I cannot stress this enough: get your driver's license as quickly as you can, because it makes you so useful to a lot of people, especially in the music industry, because, as you say, a lot of musicians don't drive or are keen to maybe drink the beer rather than drive the van. So having those skills of tour management, sticking to a schedule, moving things around in a van have now become useful in another way just to keep me going through COVID to have any kind of work. So in a way, it's proved useful. But yeah, ultimately, I can't wait for things to come back to the way they were. So fingers crossed.
I'm hoping soon. They should come back sooner than later. I mean, given that the people are missing music, I miss like gigs so much. It's been such a long time. It's mental to think, constantly being surrounded by something obviously taken away, and everyone is trying to adapt or essentially make this time out. It's an absolute kicker. First to shut down, last to open up. But again, it's kind of do this now. But it's not as if it's all of a sudden like live music so when it will fashion. I think it's going to come back like twice fold over. So we'll be fine. It's just waiting.
Yeah, the waiting is tough, but you're right. I think when it comes back, people will be very keen to have a good time and really ramp things up because there'll be a backlog of new music to be getting played live. I think the good news is a lot of artists have still been able to make music in lockdown and even do some more DIY kind of broadcasts of shows.
Yeah,
and I've seen some good ones. They've been pretty cool. And yeah, so I mean, yeah, people will be raring to go when the time comes. So yeah.
And I keep saying this like every single time, but I'm no longer knocking back those little £5 on the door Tuesday night gigs that you get interested in, but you just wouldn't go. There's no way.
Yeah.
Your venue will be full.
Definitely. Yeah, I think people will be out in force when it's safe to do so. Get back out there, have a good time. Can't wait.
Yeah. So, okay, do you have any sort of general tips for young cats wanting to do stuff in the music industry?
Yeah, keep an open mind. It's nice to have an initial inspiration, usually based around being a performer. And you should always keep that alive. Like it's always, if you play an instrument or if you sing or if you write music, you should always have a place in your life for that. But know that it can also lead to other opportunities. The fact that people who are musicians and people who work in the industry is going to be the most important thing to building a career, whether it's your own music or working with someone else. So yeah, I mean, positive energy, being a nice person, being as helpful as you can to other people will come back to you. If you're nice to people, they'll remember, and if you're not, they'll definitely remember. So that's a good thing. Is just to always project your kind of best energy towards whatever it is you're doing, whether it's performing or writing. And when you meet new people, try and be understanding of what they're trying to do too. It's not the same kind of thing that you want to do. Glasgow's very good for that. Scotland, the music scene in Scotland, but especially Glasgow, is very open-minded. I don't feel like it's ever really been defined by one type of music. And if you're in the music scene in Glasgow, it's very much the case that a lot of people from different bands who sound nothing like each other will be really good friends and work together because it's more about the kind of cohesiveness of the music scene or the people involved than it is about trying to sell one kind of music or one kind of image. Whereas I think a lot of other cities around the world suffer more from being kind of trendy and cliquey. And I think we've got a really big advantage in Glasgow that there's a much broader church of sounds that can be encapsulated within the Glasgow music scene. It's not just about trying to sound like the next Oasis or the next Taylor Swift or anything like that. Like those people we will still find pop bands that will come out of Glasgow who will be big, and we'll still find good experimental and alternative bands and artists, and they'll all end up probably hanging out in similar circles anyway. So it's the best thing to do is just try and meet people who give you that kind of energy, who you can kind of work with, and who it's fun to be around. So yeah.
Glasgow is nice.
Yeah.
People remember friendly faces, and people are really up for helping people out, or even you need a contact for something, or put you in touch with someone they know, someone to introduce you. Everyone's really open. I've found over the past few years, so it's a good scene to be involved in.
Yeah, I mean, I did quite a lot of stuff early on, which was voluntary or unpaid work just to kind of get more experience and meet people. So again, even though you still have to work to make money to pay your rent and everything like that, I mean, and it took me about 7 or 8 years after I did my first job as a sound engineer part time to really become a full time sound engineer. I always had other part time jobs on the side. I worked in restaurants. I worked in a guitar shop for a long time, which is just a retail job, but it was cool because again it kept me around music. There are other places you can be. You could work for a PA company. There's always during festival season, companies always need people to come and do kind of boring stuff like help move equipment around fields at festivals. But again, you get to meet people, you get to go to the festivals, you get the experience, you get to see how things are done. And the more you do that, the more experience you have, the more work you'll get.
That's actually a really, really good tip as well. And obviously festival season lasts something like April all the way through to October, which is, a huge chunk of the year as well. So definitely one to obviously look out for.
Yeah, absolutely.